Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, nothing makes New Haven tick more than LEAP, which is our signature youth program for young people in both education and recreation. Started, I guess, 30 years ago. The man who started is with us today and one of the young women who helped him steer the ship. And here's what we're going to talk about today. We are in the midst of two life-changing events in our country. One is the COVID-19 pandemic, the worst pandemic public health crisis in a century. And we're in the midst of an uprising against police violence, a protest movement like we haven't seen, I'd say perhaps in decades. I'll be interested in our guest's take on that question. And as with any crisis, there is opportunity. We're going to focus today on what this means for young people in the world they were inherit and steer. Henry Fernandez is the founder and the executive director of LEAP. Good morning, Henry.
Good morning,
for coming
Paul.
on with us. And Ramzia Issa runs is the assistant site coordinator for LEAP's Dixwell site. She's a college student at Albertus Magnus. I'm going to take a wild guess. Were you ever a participant in LEAP when you were younger?
Oh yeah, I was a leader in training.
See, that's that great network LEAP sets up. It was so intelligently designed that they have people who are young getting involved as participants, and then they groom them to take jobs, being youth leaders and going to college. So good morning, folks, and thanks for coming on. Ramzi, I'd like to ask you first, when you first found out about what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, what was your reaction? How did it affect your life?
It was a lot of emotions. My first reaction was overwhelmed. I mean, I've seen police brutality play out over the past couple of years, but I don't know why. I guess maybe the 8-minute long video, 8 going to 9 minutes long video, just made a very different impact on me than it did others. It really encouraged me to get more involved than I ever have before when it came in terms of police brutality, racism, and discrimination. I was it was just like the word overwhelm. I don't even think like defines the feelings I was feeling. There's a little bit of anger, sadness, being scared for me, myself, my family, and everything. So that was kind of how it impacted me.
Very interesting what you were just saying there. So for white people, their reaction has been interesting to that video because you have all sorts of people who kind of reflexively supported police in the past in the public arena, who have rushed to say how terrible they think this was. There was something brazen about it. On the one hand, this has gone on all the time, and now video is starting to capture it. On the other hand, there was something about that extended casualness of the officer and being viewed in public. So I'm interested in how it affected you more. So you said you've seen it before. What did you seen in the past, and how did this feel different to you?
I've seen a lot. I mean, we know all the victims, like we've heard about it, like Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. And then like a couple months ago was Ahmaud Arbery. We're recently finding out about Breonna Taylor. You know, we always constantly keep making these hashtags and wearing T-shirts with the victims' names on it, and we're constantly told, given apologies and people offer their condolences. But I think this one just was like the breaking point for many people, where we're just saying enough is enough. We're tired of the hashtags, we're tired of the T-shirts, and we just want to take action. We want to see actual change. And today, I believe, is the 15th day of protesting, and I think we're not backing down until we get change.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just waiting on, our leaders, whether that's our mayors, our governors, people in our local communities, to just wake up and see the reality of police brutality and racism. So we just really want change. I think this was our breaking point.
What kind of action did you take, Ramzi? Did you participate in marches, anything like that?
No, it's kind of a health concern for my family. I do live with a lot of people home, and I have some relatives that are elderly. So I had to put that in consideration. I think that would have been the best way to manage my anger about everything, to just go protest and be a part of the change. But I have been signing a lot of petitions, spreading awareness, just trying to find how I could be more vocal about it and participate and be a part of the change. And I'm learning as well as other people. I'm learning more ways to help. I've always known my importance of voting. This is going to be my first year voting. Just trying to see what more I could do on a larger scale.
That's so real about that fear then for COVID-19. People are worried about spreading events. And I want to get back to COVID-19 a little later in this program before we move on to Henry. I want to ask you, what change are you specifically looking to support in New Haven? Are you looking for, there's a demand to defund the police department from 43 million to $10 million for their budget, move that to other uses. There are demands to end chokeholds, to greater accountability, like not protect police from civil penalties if they violate civil rights. Are you at that fine point of your demands? Are you just looking for action? Are you looking for abolishing police, greatly reducing police? What's your goal as someone who pays attention? Ramsey, what are you looking to see happen?
Well, I definitely think there should be change in our system. I feel like ever since I got in college, I've been more awakened and more enlightened on what we as a society are supposed to know. Um, I'm a sociology minor, so I'm learning about the impact of the environment on us, on children specifically. I definitely feel like there needs to be change among our police system, whether that be more some training about diversity, learning about the culture of impoverished communities. um, I know there is a rule going around, policy going around to defund the police, and I don't necessarily believe in, like, getting rid of the police all in general. I do believe that we need them, but there definitely needs to be reform in a way to change how the police view us, how the police handle us, and and then also defunding the police would also put in more resources in these these impoverished communities that would be 100% necessary, and most likely will reduce the chances of police being called, or police just being called in general just to make an arrest or anything. It will probably help our kids and the youth and just the people in the community.
And just finally on this subject, you said you personally were very aware of police misconduct in New Haven. What had you seen specifically in your life or the life of young people you work with in terms of how police treat young people in the community of color?
Um, it's through my kids, honestly. We've talked about it on so many occasions about, like, just what they go through in their community. I haven't necessarily spoken to them yet about police brutality. Well, at least before this incident, I haven't spoken to them, but we've just seen how their neighborhoods are. Some kids talk about, one time a person came to our group and just asked, she was like, what do you want to change in your community? If you could have something to change, what would you like to change? And as I listened, all the kids just talked about maybe no more arrests being done, not seeing so much of the police officers, or just
Mm.
the graffiti in their local neighborhood, like being able to just go out to the park and just play. They felt like that was something scary that they couldn't constantly do. One of my girls were like, she wants speed bumps because she witnessed a car chase go on and like they crashed into her aunt's car.
Mm.
And it was just a lot of those things that you see. And the person offered, they're like, we're trying to make a community center for kids to go where they could feel safe to step out their homes and just go out and feel safe. And they were so happy of the idea that they could do that.
All right. And we're on Dateline New Haven, talking about youth and the future, given what's going on in America right now. Ramsey Issa is an assistant site coordinator at LEAP. Henry Fernandez is founder and executive director. Florida LeDuc says hello, and Patricia Kane writes in, dismantle the paramilitary model, install community police keepers. Henry Fernandez, you follow this issue in New Haven, specifically with young people, for 30 years now at all different levels: policymaker, group organizer, person living on the city. You brought together 63 young people to talk about issues last week. Did this come up, and what were you hearing at LEAP?
Oh gosh, I mean, the whole conversation was about policing and what happened with George Floyd. We brought a group of young people, college and high school students who work with us, onto a giant Zoom call. And we were actually joined by a couple of alumni, Mercedes Soto, who used to work at LEAP at many levels up to the executive director level, and Dr. Joe Johnson, who's a principal now at at King Robinson School in the Newhallville neighborhood, but started with LEAP as a junior counselor and then became a senior counselor before going off and becoming an educator. So that as a community, we talked about what we saw and how we thought about issues of race and policing. I shared my own experiences as a young man here in New Haven and the interactions that I had with police.
What were those, Henry?
So when I was a student, I was stopped multiple times by police. I was frisked by police. When I was a teaching assistant.
What were you doing when they stopped and frisked you in New Haven?
I was just being a black man, Paul.
But I mean, what were you doing? Were you walking
I was
down
in
the street?
So in one case, I was in a store, and I was waiting in line to make a purchase, and the police stopped me and frisked me, and they
say
told me
why?
In a line in the store.
No, did they say why they did that?
Oh yeah, they said that I fit the description of someone they were looking for, and gentleman behind me in line, after they left, he laughed and he said, we all fit the description. And then another time, I was, I guess it's happened multiple times. I'll give another example. I was a teaching assistant. I was dropping off books to one of my students. I was a teaching assistant at Yale Law School. I was dropping off books to one of my students, and Yale police officer this time, the other time that I described as New Haven police, Yale police officer stopped me and wanted to know what I was doing. I mean, here I was actually acting on behalf of the university as a teacher, and trying to drop off books to a student so that she could, do her final exam. And he stopped me and made me prove, who I was, and it was just.
How'd that feel?
Oh, it's humiliating. It's a humiliating process. It's this sense that they want to let you know you don't belong, that this isn't a place where you're equal. And I think I've seen that hundreds of times with young people that I've talked to through my work at LEAP, right, where they've had these experiences, and I think the word that often comes up is humiliating. It's also, though, a part of the reason that I do the work that I do, right, and what I care about and what I know to be true for the lives of the young people. But when Paul, you'll remember this, and fortunately, the younger folks on the call won't remember, right? But when I came to New Haven, they still had the beatdown posses, right, where police officers would just stop at a corner in Newhallville, and Dwight, and jump out of a van and beat up all the young black men on the corner, right? So policing in New Haven has changed a lot. It can be, we can miss that, right? Things are a lot better than they were in the early 90s. Those improvements are important. Those improvements have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. There's still a lot to do in New Haven, around the state of Connecticut, and certainly nationally.
All right. And then so what came up last week? 63 of your, and basically, when you're talking about LEAP kids, you talk about amazing young people. I mean, people who are just part of their neighborhoods and are on a good track and are both, participating in good activities, helping other young people develop. What were they saying? So you basically, Henry, you're looking at 63 young people who are in 2020 living what you lived 30 years ago. What were they saying about this moment?
Yeah, I think, these ideas of that, these ideas that both that things need to change, but also that young people have the power to change them. So I do think that there was the kind of anger that was described earlier. There's also a sense of sadness and fear, but for young people generally, right, there's also an awakening to their power, a realization that change only has historically really come in this country when young people mobilize. And so I think that sense of power, but also concern, anger. But I think for what we're seeing on the streets, what we see with the young people who are in LEAP, many of whom are joining protests, a lot of LEAP staff who are mostly young as well are joining protests. That what we're seeing is this sense that change may be real this time, and so that's so much of who we are. The idea that young people can make a difference, and so we're proud of our young people, certainly.
Before we get over, we've been joined by Natalia Gregg. We'll get to you in a moment. Natalia, thank you for joining us. Henry Fernandez, you followed the debates about policing. You were involved very much when we brought community policing on board, which is the idea that they get more cops in neighborhoods, walking beats, getting to know people, deal with the roots of problems before they get bigger. If there's a kid who witnessed violence, bring a Yale Child Study social worker into the picture. Then we moved on to when you ran for mayor in 2013. I was very interested when you're talking about legitimacy policing. There was still a sense, despite those efforts, that people felt at odds with the police. It was still like a military occupation. And the legitimacy policing said, if I have it correct, that every interaction a cop has with a person will convince them either that they're taking legitimate action or not. And if they see you showing respect and explaining what you do and treating them like a human being, they in turn will reciprocate. They'll do the same, and communities will be safer. And the opposite if that doesn't happen. Now, Henry, events are moving very fast.
Sure.
Younger people in charge in New Haven are calling for abolition of the police. They say you can't reform the police. You have to abolish the police. Or we really look closely what people are asking for. Most people who say that don't mean don't have a 911 call if someone's holding someone hostage. Don't arrest someone who just shot someone. Right. They're saying the vast majority of what police do can be done by other functions, just have to be much smaller, which really is the opposite of community policing, but not the opposite of legitimacy policing. Where do you stand now on this, having watched this trajectory?
Sure, it's a great question, Paul. I think we're hearing some really interesting ideas coming from these, the Black Lives Matter movement, from advocates who are out in the streets about, I think, just a very simple idea that we have asked police to do so many things now but yet have trained them primarily still to engage, to solve problems through the use of force. And that many of the problems that we're asking police officers to resolve should not primarily or at all be resolved by the use of force. And whether those are going to address mental health issues, drug problems, wide range of realities. It struck me
that last year in 2019, we did have a program that we got money for to replicate what Seattle does to deal with low-level drug offenders and nonviolent offenders. We spent all this money where the police were going to oversee it. And in the end, we only helped one person top. So maybe police just can't do that best, to your point.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, let me give just a real simple example. The next door neighbor, my wife and I heard kind of a little bit of noise outside, and we walked outside one night last year, and there was a woman just passed out on the front steps of our next door neighbor's house. And we called 911, and an AMR ambulance came. No police came. An AMR ambulance came. They treated the woman with a tremendous amount of dignity and met her medical needs, and then took her away on a stretcher. There were just no police involved. And I think that happened because we were having so many drug overdoses around the city that the police department and the city realized that, in 99% of those cases, they just didn't need police to be there. And the people from AMR, from the ambulance service, the woman who was in charge, did a really amazing job and just a real sense of humanity in how she treated this woman who had overdosed. And I think that there are so many services that we've asked the police to do where they don't bring the knowledge or the skills to resolve those. And if those issues start to escalate, they may not be well positioned to find resolution to de-escalate them.
You're listening to WNHH's Dateline New Haven. We're talking about youth and change at a pivotal moment in American history. We're here with leaders of LEAP, premier recreation and youth program in New Haven. Juwan Carter writes in, we live in a time when we are told there's not enough to go around. Listen to what they'd rather see increased and decreased, since there's a cap within the budget. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Natalia Gregg. Natalia Gregg has joined us. She's a junior counselor in Leafs Hill South site, a high school student at Wilbercross. Thank you for joining us, Natalia.
Thank you.
Natalia, I wanted to ask you, how were you affected by the murder of George Floyd, and how has it affected your life now in terms of your involvement in the way you see the issue of the relationship between police and community?
Well, before, even before the tragic death of George Floyd, I was already involved in different organizations and programs that addresses the issues of things that go on, whether it was the police or the undocumented community, or I'm also a part of the Black and Brown Student Union. So I've always been looking at these issues and addressing them with another group of people, and we've been organizing there's protests now, but before all of this happened, we were already organizing get to know your right events, or things to do when the police stop you, or little things like that. But we never imagined that we would have to go out and protest as much as we have to do now. Of course we have protests here and there, but we never imagined that it will be worldwide and everybody will be fighting for our rights. So in the recent events, it has been very overwhelming. And for me personally, in my daily life, I've just seen, despite the efforts to decrease police brutality, I've seen nothing but the increasement of cop cars in my neighborhood, where sometimes it's just okay, are they here to make sure we don't protest or riot or loot anything? Or are they here with negative intent? So sometimes I don't even feel as it's safe. Sometimes I don't even want to go outside to experiment, see what they're even here for. For example, a cop car was outside my house yesterday and none of my neighbors were doing anything. And then when I walked out, I live close to Congress Avenue, and there's just an increasement in cop cars. I don't feel every 500 meters there should be a car. They're just there socializing, as if they're just waiting for something to happen. So it's been kind of tense and overwhelming in the past.
One thing you said, so you mentioned a Black and Brown Student Union. Is that across?
It's not only across, it's across Connecticut, actually.
So you were involved in this work before. Are you going to be a senior this year at Cross, Natalia?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing this right. You talked about you never imagined when you were doing that work that suddenly there's the outpouring of broader support. Are you talking about turning on the news and seeing huge crowds in London and in Paris talking about George Floyd? Is that what you're talking about? So were you involved in any of the marches in New Haven the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, we've actually we had a protest in New Wales and other parts of Connecticut. I don't live close to there, so I wasn't able to attend, but we did help organize and help rally and get the protesters everything that they need. But I have been a part of the protests in New Haven, the ones that I couldn't.
Were you last Friday at the police station or the Sunday before on I-95?
Yes, I couldn't go to I-95 because it was my aunt's birthday, but I was there all the other times.
I have to say, I never experienced anything like being on I-95 that day when we were on the highway.
Yeah.
And it was like the Berlin Wall. But
crazy.
But Natalia, let me ask you, what would you like to see come out of this specifically? Would you like to see no police department, rules about chokeholds, rules about what happens to police when they get in trouble, or is that too specific? Do you have sort of a broader vision in mind?
I've actually been thinking about majority of those questions. So I recently seen this video, and then it was basically where this woman called the cops, and she called the 911 operating center, and she's okay, there's people assaulting us out here, there's people assaulting protesters, and the operator goes on to, can you give me the description? And she goes on to say, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when the cops are the one assaulting us? Who can we call on the cops? And the operator had nothing more than say to like, well, if you want to go up a higher chain, you can call the government. But like the government is the one supplying these police forces with money and the weapons and the opportunity to even assault people in the first place. So what are we really supposed to do? And when it comes to like whether we should just like completely disband the police force at all, or like, just reform them. I feel like there's pros and cons with both, because with reform, we all know like not everyone is going to change. And I feel like if you have like, I don't know if it's me personally, but I've seen like if you ever have like any elders or elders in some type of organization, you're always going to hear, well, back in my day or when I was doing this, I've been doing this for 20 years and then da da da, and this always works. So I don't see why we need to change. So they're always going to be like not necessarily closed-minded, but those that are not open to change, and they might pit on the front, but they're still doing the same corrupt things. That way, I don't really completely trust like the reformation. But also, the complete disband isn't sounding as bad right now. But then it also goes back to like who's going to protect us, because like we've been so used to or ingrained in our mind that we need the police for safety instead of us protecting one another, especially like in a community way. So.
And Natalia, what have been your experiences with police officers in your life, either directly or people close to you?
Well, directly and with people close to me, well, I haven't like had, well, not that I haven't had experiences, but like my dad, unfortunately, he was like locked up a lot during my childhood. And also another unfortunate thing is that I was there for some of those arrests. So like just seeing the way like they treated him and like just pushed him to the ground. And I remember one time we were just walking to the store and then it was like, hey, da 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 da. And I guess he fit some type of description. I'm just like, okay, this is my dad. And we're just walking to the store and like just seeing the way they were so rough with him. And like, it just makes me think about things that like I try not to think about, but like just seeing the way they like used excessive force and like just pushed him to the ground. And that wasn't even the man that you were looking for. And I'm just like, wow, like you have total disregard that I'm standing right here. And I feel like it's happening a lot these days. Like it's so like dehumanizing that you don't realize that these people aren't just criminals or people who fit the description. These are people with families and lives. And just like you, these people can be fathers to children and uncles and brothers and cousins. And these people are expecting them to go home. And they're locked up in a cell. Not saying that all is innocent, but sometimes not even who you're looking for, because that was the scenario with me. That was my circumstance. My father wasn't even who they were looking for.
Wow.
And seeing him pushed to the ground like that, that's like the disrespect. And he just looked at me and my mom had to come get me. So like it can be like very detrimental. Like,
how old were you at that point, Natalia?
I think I was 7 around that time.
Wow. I'm sorry you went through that. That seems like a moment you never forget.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're trying to put that to productive use now in terms of getting involved in changing what happens to a new generation of young people in our community. That's what we're talking about today in Dateline New Haven, WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. We're talking about how young people see the changes going on in America, how it's affecting their lives, and how they might do better than some of us did at an older generation. We're doing that with people from LEAP, Henry Fernandez, Ramzia Issa, Natalia Gregg. And let me pivot a little bit to how this ties in with COVID. In this pandemic that none of us expected, Ramzia talked about how she has found ways to be involved with the change accountability without endangering elderly and just older people she lives with by bringing home the virus, by going to a protest. How has this affected LEAP? Maybe if I start going back with you, Ramzia, you're the assistant director of the Dixwell site. So if this were a normal period, you'd be in person every day, correct? I don't know where you meet in Dixwell. If maybe you can let us know. What instead are you doing because of this pandemic?
Yeah, we used to meet in King Robinson. It's been a very big transition, a very big change going strictly online and not being able to see the kids in person. Um, there's a lot that we miss among my counselors and the children where it's that in person, just kind of like that human connection you typically will get. We would never have predicted that, in like less than a week or just also suddenly we would have
Yeah.
to go strictly online and not see each other. Our last day is today. I'll have my last session. And yesterday I had to basically say goodbye to one of my kids and she's going to North Dakota. Well, she's in North Dakota now for the summer, so I won't get to see her till the fall. So it was just kind of like in a sense very emotional, knowing that like we really haven't seen each other in person for that whole entire time. But I think Leap, we did a good job with the transitioning going strictly online. We had to use various ways. We provided computers for the kids, and we would use Zoom calls like we're using right now to communicate with the kids. Some kids, it would be maybe through the phone or FaceTime, and we've just been helping them with their homework, trying to be a source for them to talk to when it comes to dealing with everything going on, hoping them stay optimistic in a sense and stay safe, and just trying to still incorporate what we would have incorporated while we're on ground, but just from a distance in a sense.
Ramsey, were you with them every day still? Like every afternoon? Did you have all the kids? And how many kids were there in Dixwell? I guess it's New Hallville too if you're Jackie Robinson.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a decrease from kids. Like typically, I had about, for 11 and 12 girls, I had about 5 to 7 girls on a good day. But now, unfortunately, I had like three kids who committed to online learning. For some parents, it was just not manageable and something manageable for them to do during the entire pandemic. So yeah, it was just a few kids for
I
me.
think that's great. I mean, this wasn't even school where they have to do it by law and they have a tough enough time. It's great you guys were in there doing it. So you obviously couldn't do athletics, right? You couldn't like throw a frisbee across the computer to each other on Zoom. But it sounds like were you doubling down on the computer homework, things like that?
Yeah, I feel like it was more because since it was one-on-one, we tried to do like like working as a group, like a group call, but time just didn't work out for my group specifically. Like one kid would be available at a different time and another would be available at a certain time. So it was just one-on-one for me. We tried to get active. Our site coordinator, John, he always has these minds on ways we could still, in a sense, have that site morale in our among our kids. So we tried to do various of things. One of them was like, I don't know if the TikTok app.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't really know. I'm not gonna pretend I'm young and hip. With Warren, with the one from Sunday Night Live, do a great TikTok with the.
Yeah.
I know it's like.
Yeah, so John suggested that we tell our kids to do a couple of challenges, any of the challenges that they want. And, dancing is a way to get active. So a lot of kids, they love that when we were at site in person, we'd struggle to get them off their phones just to do this, to not be on TikTok. So now we're like, you know what, just to stay active, send us some of your TikTok videos. So we just they sent it to us, we sent it to our group chat. And yeah, that's our way of getting active with them.
Well, it sounds like you're being creative and making it work. How about this summer? What's up for you and with your LEAP cohort this summer?
We're still learning as we go. Right now, I believe we're doing, our program has been shortened for 4 weeks for now. And we're going to do 1 week in person and try to follow all the safety precautions and like the social distancing. Obviously, we have to have masks on, constant hand sanitizing, and unfortunately, we won't be on school grounds.
So where are you going to be?
I believe Intense from my the last thing I remember. So Intense, and we have to reduce our capacity in a sense, so 10 kids per group, which wouldn't be a problem for me. I mean, in the summer, yeah, it would be a different. I never got more than 10 kids during the school year, but I don't know how the summer would look. Yeah, but we're still learning as we go. We still have about 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks till the summer component starts. So we're still seeing if there's more change about to come.
All right, Henry Fernandez, you've done a great job pivoting. I guess you were well positioned for this. You're one of the earliest tech adopting people I knew in New Haven. And I mean, people our age will know how the whole world wasn't online the way it is now when we were starting out. how have you seen this pivot? So you've managed to keep things going. You've adjusted. You've gone to Zoom meetings for the school year. You're going to have a partial, it sounds like, in-person, partial online summer. Tell me about that, Henry.
I think Ramsey laid it out well. We're actually going to be starting later. So in about 2 weeks, we'll start with our training for counselors. And then we'll, after the week after July 4th, we'll then start with kids is currently our plan. And obviously all of this is really driven by the rules for summer programs that are coming out of the state of Connecticut and the city of New Haven. But we'll serve probably about half the total number of kids that we would normally serve. And our goal is to either work is to bring our program outside. Because we know that that's a lot safer than inside with regard to COVID-19. We'll take a wide range of safety precautions with everyone's temperature being tested every day before they enter the program, with all the staff taking COVID-19 tests, and lots of hand sanitizers, as was said. So we're really working out some of the details. We have a whole team of folks working on this. We surveyed our parents, and parents by 2 to 1 want us to run an in-person program, but we're almost certainly going to cut hours. We're cutting the number of weeks. We're going to go for 4 weeks instead of 6. But if it seems like things are working well, we might extend for a week or 2. But it's all totally uncharted territory. We've been doing the same, running very similar program. We've made improvements over the years, but for, now 28 years, we've been running the same kind of summer program model, and we're going to have to completely rebuild it. So we have teams working on curriculum. We have teams working on the safety elements. We're spending a lot of money on things like thermometers. The price of a thermometer has skyrocketed. And so a thermometer that might have cost $20 is now $90. We're spending a lot of money on masks. We have thousands and thousands of masks, and we're purchasing thousands more, as well as tents and tables and lots of cleaning supplies. So we're going to give this a shot, but we also recognize that if at any point we start to feel like it's not working or there's safety issues that arise, we would be stepping back from it. So it's complicated, but it's what our parents want. And when we talk to mental health professionals, when we talk to medical professionals, we're hearing a lot of concern, and we're seeing a lot of concern for the mental health of young people because they're not having social interaction. And so a key factor that we took into consideration too is that when we surveyed our parents, and hundreds of parents responded to our survey, they indicated that the strong majority indicated that their children would be outside interacting with other kids, whether they were in LEAP this summer or not. And so we decided that, and obviously when they're doing that, there's no one overseeing whether or not they're wearing a mask, whether or not they're following safety protocols. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for us to make sure we can do this right. And if we aren't sure about that, then we won't go forward. But our goal right now is to do this hybrid of 1 week of in-person programming, followed by 1 week of virtual programming. And as I said, we'll be serving about half the number of kids that we would otherwise be.
What is that number, Henry?
So this summer, we'd be looking to do about 350 kids. In a normal summer, we might do closer to 700 kids.
Wow, what a responsibility you have. I mean, I was so interested to hear you talk about that, Henry. On one hand, these kids are going to be out there anyway. So if LEAP is up and running, it's going to give kids a better summer, a safer summer. On the other hand, you have such a responsibility. So if you were would do nothing because all you worry about is getting sued. Everybody's safe, but there's so many unknowns with COVID. But I salute you. And we're talking about LEAP. We're talking about young people. We're talking about change on WNHH 103.5 FM live stream at newhaven.org with Ramsey, Issa, Henry Fernandez, and Natalia Gregg. Before we move on to Natalia, Henry, what about that model? 28 years you've done it a certain way. You're going to have to think of another way because of the pandemic. We heard a lot in the pandemic about how organizations that might be evolving anyway, technologies that will change, the human routines that will change. are being sped up. Do you think there'll be any permanent changes in how LEAP operates and how youth development, recreation, education take place as a result of what we experiment with and how we roll with COVID-19?
Well, I think, I would say yes. I mean, I think we've become even more technology engaged, but I think we've also learned, frankly, that virtual programming doesn't work, right? It certainly doesn't work at scale, and kids are burned out on it. We're seeing, even though we opened up the program to all of our kids to join virtually, only about half of our children actually participated virtually. And there's thousands of kids as well. In talking to the New Haven school superintendent, there's thousands of kids in New Haven public schools who have never participated in virtual learning. And to some extent, this was because of the access to technology. And so we have given out a ton of computers, laptops to kids and helped families get online. And we're continuing to do that. But a part of it is that, a central element of LEAP is the interpersonal interaction and the willingness of young people to make a difference in their neighborhood. And this has really ripped us out of that. So I think, yes, there are changes to the ways I think all of us will operate going forward. But we've also seen how important the in-person human connection is for young people, but for all of us. And that losing that has been a horrible loss that's going to result in trauma for children well into the future. And I don't think we have any idea of what that's going to look like and the implications for it, and the risks that people may start to take, for in order to get out of the house. And so I think it's, yes, there are improvements that we've all learned about, technologies that we've all learned about. Everybody in LEAP knows how to use Zoom at this point. Hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds and hundreds of kids, hundreds and hundreds of teenagers. So that's certainly true, and I'm sure we'll use it in some form going forward. But make no mistake, this isn't working, right? Children are not being effectively educated through online tools, particularly our children, children from low-income neighborhoods are not getting, on average, are not getting a good education through this. And when we think about LEAP, we'll get better. We're learning a lot about how to use tools like Zoom and how to do virtual programming. We have a whole team just working on a virtual literacy program for us for this summer. But it will not be nearly as good as children sitting in a circle reading books together with their counselor. That won't be present.
When people say an idea is interesting, usually means that's because we agree with it. I find it very interesting what you just said, because while we read about people say we'll do more distance learning, corporations and more people work at home, I believe in-person can't be replaced in so many ways, whether it's the relationships between human beings, romantically, friendship, experiencing life. Or, I'm in journalism. I don't believe that this radio show is as good as it would be if we were all in the studio together and connecting. I want to ask Natalia about that. So Natalia, you work in your neighborhood. You grew up in the Congress Avenue area. You are helping to run the Hill South site. Yep. Tell me how that's affected you doing this online versus in person. What do you do with kids in LEAP, and how do you do it online versus in person, Natalia?
Well, I work with the younger age group. So I work with 7 to 8 girls. And so they're younger. And even though they're younger, don't underestimate them. But also some of them don't really understand what's going on around them. So I try my best to inform them, and let them know. But when it comes to curriculum and things, it has had its pros and cons. I feel when because we have one-on-one sessions with them rather than it's just a large group with my co-counselor. But I feel my girls, they have been liking the direct attention, but they don't like that it's online, which is, I feel the same way. When I'm talking to them personally, when I get their meetings, I'm able to see what are their likes and dislikes. That way I could better implement it in my curriculum. Sometimes I just give them personalized curriculum. that way they're still learning what they need to learn. But just some of my girls aren't interested in the same thing. And I learned that the hard way. So like trying to teach them about the one same thing. Now, if it's important, they're going to learn about it. But like just trying to get them to, they're not having it. Like they're little sassy fireballs. They're not having it. So when I'm able to talk to them one-on-one, like whether the Zoom calls or FaceTime calls, I'm able to like get to know them better in a way, but also like teach them directly instead of like, and I feel like it's also like beneficial instead of like when you have to ask you have to ask a question without the embarrassment, because that was another issue that was going on in person that we tried to debunk. But I feel like they're able to like learn how they want to learn now. Even though it's virtual, like I let them have control of their learning.
And let me bring you a little bit full circle here. You've been involved with high school students organizing as police misconduct. Tell me if I'm wrong. I would assume a lot of your work is done online to reach each other. You work with people in other cities. So you go online. Yeah. Does anything substitute for showing up in public and taking over a highway?
No, it does not. Like, and I just love the people that I work with, like no matter what organization it is. So it's nothing's beating sitting in like the room, organizing and mapping out the next plan and where we're going to protest. Or we're all doing this on a Zoom call, and it's not the same at all. But even though has been virtual, I have been like very like pleased and like surprised by the outcome of how many people show up in person to protest. Like we organize this online, and we think like, oh, not many people are going to see the flyers. Okay, maybe a few people show up, maybe 100. Like it's all across the state, and I'm just like, wow.
All right, well, keep it going. Well, folks, you've now for the better part of an hour heard about why we can be optimistic about the future of New Haven at a time when we face so many challenges. The young people at LEAP are making such a difference with young every day through their program, pivoting through the less than perfect conditions of the COVID-19 crisis and speaking up about the big challenges that we face. Henry Fernandez, what can our listeners do to support the work you're doing at LEAP?
Well, certainly, we're always happy to have people donate, and they can go to our webpage, leapforkids.org, and donate. And I have to say that folks have been in this community have been wonderful. We've seen a real uptick, even despite the major economic crisis. We've seen an uptick in donors at all levels, donors who are giving $5 or $10, up to donors who are giving thousands of dollars. The last few months, we've seen people really invest in our work and in our community, and so we really appreciate that. I would also say that I think there's a real opportunity beyond LEAP to support organizations working with young people. A wonderful rally on Friday, led by multiple groups, including the Citywide Youth Coalition. And I think there's an opportunity to support organizations like Citywide who are doing that kind of organizing with young people and supporting young people in this movement period as well. And I think there's also the opportunity for folks to organize within their own towns, because what we're seeing with regard to issues of police brutality also go to a series of systemic issues in Connecticut. And so whether that's the fact that our housing and our schools in Connecticut are extremely segregated, people can work in their own towns, whether that's New Haven or it's the suburbs, to try to break through and make sure that there's affordable housing in all of Connecticut's towns. We have far too many school districts. We're spending far too much money on school superintendents in towns all over the state, and not enough money on programs for young people. We can start to look at opportunities for people to really gain activism around desegregating schools, because I went to desegregated schools that are now resegregated in upstate New York, and it made a huge difference in who I know and how I understand the world. And if we want people to be able to make real change, they have to be able to talk across divides that exist and have existed for centuries in this country. And school integration is an important element of that. I'm just giving these as examples of places where folks can really engage to try to address systemic racism in this country. Whether it's by making change in their town so that its housing and schools are more integrated, whether it's going into the streets and protesting. As I mentioned, many of us joined the rally on Friday, this past Friday, around making sure that we're starting to move resources into other ways of engaging, not just thinking of police as the solution to every problem, but starting to move resources into solving problems through a wide range of services and opportunities. There's no reason, for instance, that in New Haven this summer or any summer, that every young person who wants a job shouldn't have one. We should be spending money to make sure that young people have opportunities for employment. We should be spending money to make sure that young people, New Haven has this wonderful program, New Haven Promise. It should be replicated all across the state, where young people who grow up here can go to college for free at any of the state universities. That should be the norm. What we've seen now is that there are thousands and thousands of young people in New Haven and across the state, and tens of thousands across the state, who don't have access to technology in their home. And that means right now that they're not able to get an education. But that was the case even before COVID-19, that they were not able to use technology in their homes in order to do homework or study, that sort of thing. So there's so many places where when we start to get at systemic racism, it gets to how we're choosing to spend money and whether or not we're raising enough money, from all of us as taxpayers to really meet the needs of this city and this state.
All right, Ramzia, Issa, Natalia, Greg, Henry Fernandez, and the great people at LEAP. Thanks so much for joining us today in Dateline, New Haven. Give us a glimpse of the great work you're doing, and keep it up. Keep making New Haven a better place, and keep inspiring us about what the next direction young people are going to lead us in our community. And I want to apologize for all the noise in the background. Someone started using a chainsaw right outside my window in the middle of this program. I'm running around my house to try to get places where you can hear me and muting and unmuting. And I also want to thank Harry Drost, the WNHA station manager, the miracle man behind the controls, gets us to so many realms of cyberspace. They're going to have to invent a new dimension. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Babz inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night here at WNHH, New Haven's home.